Yeah. All right, so Kirsty, this is a presentation that both Kirsty Downey and I will make to you today, and we'll start by getting Kirsty to share the screen. So critically though, I think we can take questions as we go. There's so much information in this presentation that if you leave it all to the end, you're likely to have your mind going down another alleyway. So let's just take questions as we go. But the purpose of the presentational workshop today is to provide an overview of the Future of Local Government Panel's interim report and to discuss a roadmap for Council's response to that, so that we're best prepared to champion White Pass. So let's go to the first screen. Thanks, Kirsty. Okay, so what we're going to cover today is the key points that came out of the interim report, consideration of Council's submission to the panel, and they have listened. Priority questions that the panel will want addressed over the next phase of their deliberations, the time frame for the panel's work, our response or a roadmap for that work, and then open up for discussions and questions. So let's pop on to the next slide. Thanks, Kirsty. So just to recap, the purpose of the review is to consider how New Zealand's system of local democracy and governance will need to evolve over the next 30 years in order to improve the well-being of New Zealanders and actively embody the treaty partnership. So something of a constitutional change there. Until now, local government has focused on its obligations under the treaty to the extent in which they're enshrined in law. So the Resource Management Act have general regard to, Local Government Act involve Māori in decision making, those sorts of things. But now they're looking to actively embody the treaty partnership in this review. The review is to be undertaken in 3 stages: early soundings, followed by a broader engagement, leading to formal consultation and development of a final report. And the panel's interim report was released earlier this month, and the report reflects the results, or this report reflects the early soundings and provides a foundation for future discussion. So there's a really good summary of the points on this slide on page 10 of the report. But the themes which emerged during the first stage are the funding and financing issues. Critically, the demands on councils are increasing at the same time as that demands to keep rates and impacts down are very real. There is increasing regulatory and compliance requirements. That's not just the requirements that we're imposed or required to impose on the community, but the regulatory requirements imposed on the council itself. The relationship that local government has with central government is characterised by misunderstanding and mistrust, and too many consultation and engagement demands are placed on iwi without improvements to Māori wellbeing. That comes through things like the provisions that we've got in legislation, but also treaty settlements, requirements for joint management agreements, those sorts of things. The panel also found a lack of diversity in representation and decision-making on councils, and so that effectively decisions do not effectively represent all of the communities of interest that council is responsible for. It also found that there is a need for the business sector to be better engaged because their needs aren't being met, which goes to the heart of the economic wellbeing part of our role. And there's a real lack of innovation at local level. And primarily that's driven by a checkbox process type arrangement that we have to go through when we go through special consultative processes, and not allowing for genuine engagement and innovation. So those were the key sort of themes that emerged during the first phase. Let's go on to the next slide. Thanks, Kirsten. So looking to the future, the following emerged during stage 1. Firstly, that new and improved systems of local governance are needed. So that's not local government, but local governance. So the way in which communities govern and govern themselves and are governed. And that cuts to the heart of the things that we've been discussing during our representation review, the possibility of standing up committees, genuine engagement with those committees, and then passing responsibility back for implementation of some of those roles. We should also build on the strengths of local knowledge and placemaking. The local voice and community leadership are important, even if some of the functions are going to be delivered at a larger scale. So that's a tilt towards the reforms that central government are currently undertaking, where many things are being centralised, whether it's waters, RMA, health, and education. So the review's saying that for the future we need better local voice and community leadership. There's also not one size fits all in terms of local governance. Effectively, we've got lots of different types of communities within New Zealand with different socio-economic profiles and different social, cultural, economic and environmental wellbeing needs. We need to better foster innovation at local level. And secondly, that councils and iwi can work more effectively as partners. New funding and financing mechanisms are required, and changes to representation and electoral arrangements should be considered, especially to strengthen local democracy, decision-making and leadership. Thanks, Kirsten. So challenges for the community, or those challenges that the community will be facing, have been identified as climate change, and that's particularly so for those communities near coastal areas. Natural and hazard shocks. New Zealand is very prone to earthquakes, wildfires, floods, those sorts of things. Adverse impacts on environmental quality, and in particular, the panel talks about Indigenous species and habitats becoming endangered, and the pollution risks essentially from things like urban areas, farms and forestry. We also talk about our economic performance and relative to the incomes of other OECD countries. New Zealand's incomes have been declining since the 1960s, so a real need to up the economic performance of the country. They also talk about housing affordability and conditions as being a key issue, because housing ownership since the 1950s in New Zealand has generally been declining. We also focused on inequalities in the provision of health cares, and essentially some parts of the community simply can't afford the basics. Mental wellbeing is an issue that is gaining in significance right across the country. And then there are the impacts of science and technology, especially as we look at more working from home, how we learn, recreation, and also whether or not we need to travel. And finally, demographic change. By 2048, the New Zealand population will be about 6.2 million people. There will be more deprivation in some areas than others, and we have an ageing population. So all of these key points, as in the challenges, are articulated quite well from page 18 of the report. Thanks, Kirsty. So challenges for local government, and specifically they're outlined in the report, and one is that the need for a better relationship between central and local government. Government has consistently over a large number of years promulgated legislation without much engagement or involvement with local government. There is significant variation in capability and capacities across councils, so that at one end of the scale, you've got Auckland with about, I think it's 1.8 million and a $4 billion annual budget, to those smaller councils representing 10,000 or less people with very limited capacity. The growth and financial pressures are creating significant demands on our finances, especially at a time when demands on your services are increasing. And this sort of masks the fact that councils' revenues have generally increased in line with household incomes. The delegation of functions to local government often occurs without adequate resourcing provision. So you think about the environmental standards we have to comply with, building standards that we have to both comply with and ensure other parts of the community comply with as well. So other challenges include overlapping and conflicting responsibilities, and it's interesting that in the view of the Productivity Commission, the local government sector operates under a complex web of legislation which is poorly integrated, hard to administer, and not delivering the intended outcomes. There are very low participation and representation rates in local government. So just over 40% of people engage in local government elections, and therefore there's a sense that local governments are not fully representative of the communities they're making decisions for. There are the impacts of climate change, not just on TLAs, but the communities we represent. Somehow central government and local government must pursue similar climate change objectives, because there's a really very real sense that local government can't deal with the impacts of climate change on its business on its own. And finally, the technology requirements. As time goes by, the need for increased and improved technology increases. Between 70 odd territorial authorities, there must be ways in which we can get better coordination and collaboration, particularly in the data management space. Thanks, Kirsty. So there are opportunities that are immediately available to build on existing strengths and challenges, according to the report. So the first is the central government reforms and the need for better coordination and transition arrangements, especially as we think about central government centralising so much of what we do and they do in the health, education, resource management and through waters reform. There's going to be a real disconnect between our communities and the service delivery agencies, and there's a thought that local government can play a key role in assisting communities to have better voice, choice and control when it comes to the delivery of those services. I've already talked about growing digital capability and capacity, and that's something that the Waikato LAS is looking at very closely. Enhancing the collaborative approaches to community wellbeing. The Local Government Act provides a very strong mandate here in the full wellbeing space, and so we're thinking a lot about the way in which we can better partner the community to deliver the community outcomes that the communities are asking for. Strengthening iwi capability and capacity is another issue that's raised. And critically, the report asks where there are iwi issues to consider, we must include where a larger role for iwi might be desirable and how this might be supported, and where the right interface might be with central government and local government on this issue. Critically, with the introduction of Maori awards, there's a need to lift cultural knowledge and competence within councils, both staff and elected members, beyond current levels, and perhaps the need for a national support framework for Maori ward representatives when they're elected to councils. And the other critical issue was that the government or the review panel is suggesting to all that when central government develop legislation, that we jointly develop impact statements so that the Crown is very much aware of the costs and obligations that are being handed down to territorial authorities and the impact on our communities. And that would be a major step forward in my view. So let's just talk about Council's submission for a moment. We made a submission to the panel on its scoping paper back in August, and our key focus was what will best enable good governance in our communities, the role of local government in enabling resilient communities, that's all for wellbeings. Local government is legally empowered to change the way in which it works with communities, so that's very much about stepping out of the current sort of checkbox mentality we run to special consultative procedures, resource management act procedures, so that we've got a process that really disempowers the community. We go out with a proposition, people make a submission, we make a decision, it goes back. And there's not really this ongoing engagement, jointly developing solutions and then implementing them. And the current suite of government reforms provide opportunities for council to start to shape the future of local governments now, mindful of what we're up to with our community plans. So critically, they're all about better engagement, implementation of outcomes, community voice, choice and control, and fostering innovation. Really goes to the heart of what we're doing at the moment. So consideration of the council's submission on the scope of review, the panel has listened, and I was really heartened to see how much of the submission that we made has been picked up within the report. They recognise the importance of ensuring the current reforms are coordinated and aligned, and there are really good transitional arrangements in there. They recognise there are immediate steps that we can take, especially with the ambit of the things we do under the Local Government Act around placemaking. And through that, there are really good opportunities to build capacity and trust between partners, provide for innovation, and to leverage local government's current strengths as key relationships, local knowledge, the Local Government Act, placemaking, and community voice, choice and control. So very happy that the panel has picked up on all of those suggestions. So now the panel will be going back to consult a little bit more widely and look at priority questions. So these are summarised here around how should the system of local governance be shaped. So there's a really good summary actually on page 46 of the report. Effectively what they say here is that the future wellbeing of New Zealand communities will depend on the actions of many people and organisations, not just councils, including individuals, their whānau, businesses, Māori iwi organisations, community organisations, local and central government, and many others. Critically, they see considerable potential for that coordination and alignment to occur through the community-led and place-based approaches. Think the Waipa community plan process that we're going through at the moment. Secondly, what are the future functions, roles, and essential features of local government? And critically here, what fits best where, so that you've got councils with huge scale and you've got others with relatively little scale and ability to deliver. So who should deliver what? Who should have a say about what? These are critical questions for the next phase of the review. And how can a system of local governance give effect to authentic partnership under the treaty? And most broadly, what they expect to consider is the scope for iwi, Māori and local authorities to work together in order to meet shared objectives for prosperity, environmental health, equity, equality, and social and cultural wellbeing. So that's a major piece of work for the panel to do over the next 6 months. And that links to, how can a system of local governments give effect to authentic partnership under the treaty? What needs to change to best reflect and respond to our communities? And a lot of this is around building trust and confidence. And what funding and finance changes are required? So this is all outlined on page 51 of the report, and I'd commend that section to you. So there are significant cost drivers in the business of local government, differences in capacity of and our ability to deliver. There is a mix of funding tools required, and there are real concerns around equity, that's ability to pay, intergenerational equity, and who benefits and who pays. So those are the priority statements, or priorities actions that will be addressed, or questions will be addressed through the next phase. So the time frame for this panel's work, so it's September 21 to April 22, there's engagement on those priority questions. Early 2022, the panel will have an online tool available for feedback. From March to April, there'll be engagement with territorial authorities. April to August, testing and refinement of ideas, and September 22, a draft report provided to the Minister, which will finally be adopted April 2023. So quite an ambitious time frame. Thanks, Kirsten. So what's Waipa's response? Look, genuinely, we're pretty excited about this, especially given that the panel has taken up quite a few of the suggestions from the Waipa district. So within the council staff, there's quite a buzz about this. Our focus is to ensure that we're in the best position to champion Waipa. The work is prioritised through our organisation's business plans, and it's a piece of work that executive team are leading, and Kirsty and I are leading that piece of work. Your role in all of this, of course, is critical, as we will be connecting with you on a regular basis and seeking your inputs and insights. And a lot of this will be coming through the work that we're doing on the Waipa community plans. And we're also developing communication strategy. The immediate focus for that is on the internal audience, but then, of course, as the plan develops, we'll be going out more widely. Thanks, Kirsty. So what's our roadmap look like? Critically, we don't have all the answers, and so there is a lot to learn from other partners within the local government family in New Zealand, Taituara, which is the staff professional body for local government, Waikato LAS, Mayoral Forum, LGNZ, and other partner councils. So we're looking to establish a coalition of the willing, I guess, like-minded councils to coordinate and research and share learnings, both locally and from international research. And we want to build on the great work already underway across the organisation, and we've got a lot of talent, especially when it comes to local placemaking. We've done some great work already, particularly through the Parongia Village Town Concept Plan, the Cambridge Concept Plan, Refresh, those sorts of things. And we'll continue discussions about governance to determine how we can better connect with our communities to develop and implement priorities to provide for community wellbeing. Kirsty, is there anything you want to add in the space around the work that you've been doing on the community plan?
Probably come to that on the next slide, Gary, but just with regard to bullet point 1, there is already a lot of work that is underway. So Local Government New Zealand, Taituara, the suggestion from Gary is that we approach them with a view to them adopting a partnership approach with helping councils to best respond to this opportunity. With regard to the Waikato LAS, there is a work stream underway relating to the assessment of community needs. So looking at the data that councils collect in relation to community wellbeing across the LAS geographical area, and Haven Walsh from the strategy team is representing Waipa, inputting to and receiving information through that work stream. Already there's been work undertaken through the Mayoral Forum, the assistance that Peter McKinlay has been assisting Gary with in terms of presenting not only Waipa's views, but also the views that were shared through the CEs of Waikato councils to the New Zealand Productivity Commission. That's all related. The upcoming Zone 2 meeting at the end of this week, and the work that is underway through Future Proof and through collaborations with partner councils. Over to the next slide, we'll be talking about the Waipa Community Spatial Plan that is underway, and this really brings everything together, I guess. I liken it to our kitty. It brings together various woven strands of the work that council is doing, and really, I think, speaks to a number of the issues that have been raised through the interim report. So perhaps we'll just turn to the next slide, Gary.
Thanks, Kirsty. Yeah, so just in relation to the work we've been doing around place-based thinking, I engaged with Becca, who are helping us with our spatial plan. And my major concern was this lack of connection between central and local government when it comes to delivering on 4 wellbeings. And so we started to think about how we could stitch we were calling it a spatial plan initially, and then that was taken over by the Natural and Built Environments Act. But essentially, we've now called it our Waipa Community Plan, but we wondered how on earth we could stitch this into a national planning framework so that as communities develop their desired outcomes, how could we then influence central government to assist us in the delivery of those outcomes? And so that's culminating in a paper which should be ready any day now. And we're looking to produce a magazine piece that we'll put out there for the likes of the Local Government New Zealand magazine and other publications to see if we can't get some momentum in stitching this place-based planning into a national planning framework. So that's been quite an exciting piece of work. Of course, the development of the Waipa Community Plan will be the key work stream that we will use to advance this notion of the future of local government. And of course, everything we do begins and ends with people. So this is all about people and the communities. It's not so much about the council, but how communities are governed. And of course, a lot of this might mean that councils have to relinquish a bit of control and pass back to communities the ability to implement some of these plans. It's about reimagining the future of local governance, not local government, will help us to ensure that we successfully deliver on the vision to build connected communities within Waipa. So that's us in a nutshell, and we're really keen just to throw the floor open for questions and discussion. So, Kirsty, perhaps we could stop sharing the screen and just. So, look, interested in comments, discussion, thoughts, far away.
Gary, could I make a start?
Sure.
Yeah, thanks. Pretty neat presentation and lots of wonderful opportunities presented there. And yeah, it raises a heck of a lot of questions for me. The biggest question, I guess, is it's all very well to do this review, but a lot of it, a huge amount of it, depends on a willingness of central government to relinquish some of their activities or funding areas to local government. For instance, if we were going to become more involved in community well-being, sort of in a more general sense, so certainly I can see it makes a lot of sense to me to broaden our activities to encompass a lot of social well-being things, and environmental ones too, but that could not necessarily be funded through rates, and so therefore would we be able to have access to central government funding streams? Yeah, has there been any indication that central government is open to relinquishing some of their funding for these kind of activities?
So there are two schools of thought on that, Claire. One is the panel has made it very clear that we need to look at a new raft of funding tools for the activities for which we'll be responsible. Critically, though, there's also a school of thought that says local governance or local government ought to be focusing on being advocates rather than actually delivering services. So in the UK experience would say that as territorial authorities or local councils have obtained finance for delivering social outcomes, and then you have a change in government or a change in direction, then those services are pulled out. Then you're really left with dealing with the voluntary sector to deliver on those same outcomes. So there's a strong school of thought that would say that councils should be advocates for their community as opposed to actually delivering those services.
Oh, okay. And well, just moving on to funding and financing. So some of the suggestions I've put forward, like with the water reforms and that, has been revenue bonds, which is a way for financing to be generated from user charges for new infrastructure, which could be applied either to, water services, but other infrastructure items as well. But that's the most easy one to sort of get your head around. And also carbon credits. Yeah, so if we do some investment so that we'll reduce our emissions, we should be able to get carbon credits as a way to help pay for them. So I'd love to see those suggestions sort of put forward, because they're not part of the government's tax take at the moment. So hopefully they'd be willing to facilitate, set that up so we could actually access those tools.
Yeah, critically, that's one of their priority questions to look at in the next tranche of work, Claire. What should change in local governance funding and financing to ensure viability and sustainability, fairness, equity, and maximum well-being? So that's a very big topic, but it cuts to the core of the issues that you've just raised.
Yeah, so is there any chance of staff including those two specific examples? Because I know central government is aware of them, but there's been absolute silence when I've asked them as to why they're not allowing them to be activated in New Zealand.
So
they use overseas.
can I just respond to that, Claire? And this is really our first touch point with elected members on the back of the interim review. But what we see is a program of work that we've tried to signal moving forward, and want to ensure that Waipa is best positioned, that we've done our research and worked with other councils and organisations and engaged with elected members to have a well-formed view with some really, positive and innovative suggestions about the way forward when we're provided with the opportunity to directly engage with the panel early next year. So in terms of those priority questions that Gary covered off in the presentation, as he mentioned, there is one specific to funding and financing. We'd actually see that we have focused workshop sessions with you, not necessarily one on each question. Some are interrelated, but that is the next step that I see that we would be engaging. So absolutely, there will be the opportunity for us to capture those recommendations.
Oh yeah, that's great. It's encouraging because I do feel that a lot of the stuff's been very general, and that it would be good to pick on specific tools that are used overseas successfully. Yeah, I mean, that's the whole idea about innovation, isn't it? Which is one of the things that was picked up, that we're not innovative enough, or possibly not. And I noticed in the report that they make a particular reference to the OECD report that, I've got the title of it here, Anticipatory Innovation Governance. So is that likely to be used as a kind of framework or sort of a guide to shape some of the changes that might be sort of, I suppose the sector might discuss, and work out if they want to apply those principles? Have you had a look at that? It was mentioned in the interim report.
So the panel makes it quite clear that it wants to learn from international best practice, and so do we. So that's why we've been engaging with particularly Peter McKinley to learn from what's happening in think tanks overseas and from the Kettering Institute in the US. So when I talked about a coalition of the willing, it was really about getting some councils together to see if we could, pull down on that research and put that forward to the panel in the next stage of its review.
Yeah, and then one of the things that makes New Zealand unique, I guess, is iwi, or the treaty relationship. And I note from the report that there's a question about whether the boundaries of iwi rohe should more closely match the boundaries for local governance, TLAs or whatever. Has any consideration been given to that? Because I'm aware that, we've got in the Waikato, you've got Waikato Tainui, and then like Raukawa, Maniapoto, NKK, things like that. Had staff given any thought to what that might look like?
So Claire, when I read that section, given that the future of local government panel are looking at a genuine treaty relationship here, I didn't see that as a nod towards changing territorial authority boundaries, but more changing rohe boundaries, but more around changing territorial authority boundaries to match rohe boundaries.
Yeah, and so
It's simply a question that needs to be looked at and addressed.
Yeah, that's right. And I noticed that that the Treaty of Waitangi is used a lot, but I'm also aware that the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples also, extends a lot of the provisions of the treaty, and that also might give a different flavour to what iwi aspirations might be in terms of governance.
Okay, that's a question we would have to engage with our iwi partners on.
Yeah, okay. And then I suppose another point I wanted to just put forward is that with the lack of diversity, I mean, it'd be great to have mention of youth and also migrants in the material, because I mean, I think that when we look at the demographic challenges that we are faced with, I think those are going to be parts of our demographic that are going to become a great, I suppose there's be a lot of competition for those sectors around New Zealand, and it'd be good to think that we have got a strategy to make us attractive and give, I suppose, provide for their involvement and engagement in what we do.
Yeah, and that's at the nub of the paper, Claire. How does governance of our community genuinely reflect the communities we represent? And so they're actually particularly pointing at businesses, Maori, the environmental community. They're all parts of the community that need to be genuinely better represented in the governance of these communities.
Yeah, well, those other ones were mentioned, but I didn't see youth or migrants mentioned. That's all. Yeah. And just to finish up, so I give other people a chance to have some input as well, as with the community spatial plan, I think it is a great initiative. I've been concerned that there hasn't been very much input possible for most of us elected members, especially those that aren't on the project control group. And I'm hoping that that might change in the future, because I think I do see it as a critical sort of instrument to shape what YPAR is going to look like. And because of how important that would be, I do feel that all of the elected members should have a chance to have input into it.
So just to respond to that, Claire, as we've highlighted previously, we've been in the very early stages of really developing the thinking as to how we would approach this plan. And that was really what phase one was gathering data and information, doing a desktop survey, if you like, of all of the different plans and policy documents that were relevant to developing a community spatial plan. We've now commenced phase two, and we did listen to the feedback from the PCG and also from elected members about the importance of connecting with elected members as a whole. So the feedback and reassurance was provided by Mayor Jim recently, where he said decisions would come back to the wider council. Look, we've got a PCG meeting this afternoon where we're presenting a project schedule which will take us through until the end of the calendar year. And certainly the intention is that we do connect with all elected members. So we're providing an overview through weekly informal reporting, but we also have a placeholder at the point that for each strategic planning and policy committee, and we'll be connecting with you, whether that be by formal report, informal update or workshop. We have got a workshop programmed for the 2nd of November, and with regard to the first, I guess, key deliverable around future scenarios, we are looking at also workshopping that with you, with all elected members this calendar year. So look, we will be providing clarity around where you will be involved, but certainly we have listened and we have made adjustments, and that is the nature of this piece of work, I think, is that we need to be agile and look, what we thought it would look like has already changed. So absolutely, this is our key strategic planning document. It delivers on much of what's been highlighted here. It will build on the great work that we've already done through adopting a bottom-up approach within communities. It will build on the work that's been done in village concept plans, town concept plans, the work that's being led out of Sally's area in terms of our public spaces. And provide an opportunity to bring all of that together to guide our future investment and financial decision-making processes. So yes, absolutely, we hear you, and we will be coming back to share with you what that looks like. But absolutely, all elected members, partners, stakeholders, and our wider community all have a critical part to play.
Oh, that's great to hear, Kirsty. I'm so pleased that you've listened to that. Yeah, because I do get a bit nervous when you mentioned that you'll be bringing decisions to us, but often the decision might be just a yes or no, whereas a lot of the plan is about having input into the very substance of it, the fabric of it, and having the chance even to just put forward an idea which may in itself not be taken up, but it will trigger other ideas and other reactions which will just improve things. So that's really great news. So thank you very much for that.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Yeah, Gary, I just would like a comment on this question, I guess. I welcome this review. I think it's probably very timely. But one of the first things that came out of the interim report was the fact that there's misunderstanding and mistrust between central and local government. And I guess my question to you is, how can we, as really the entity with not a lot of power in that relationship, but what can we do to actually improve that situation?
Yes, so local government New Zealand has been working really well in this space, and until last week I thought we were making really good headway. It was interesting to see the government announce, along with that bipartisan announcement around increasing the density of housing and having to pull district plan changes together pretty smartly to give effect to that, without any reference back to local government before making the decision. It's an incredibly expensive way of accommodating increased density. Retrofitting these older areas, reimagining those spaces so that we've got to think about recreation, how people get about, the size of the pipes, all of those sorts of things. Yet again, central government has got a notion of how it can fix the housing problem, so it just imposes it on local government instead of speaking to the people at the coalface. So we've got a long, long way to go to make this work better. And building trust and confidence is a two-way thing. So we've got to put our best foot forward and show central government what we can do. And we're predominantly doing that through LGNZ.
Okay, yeah, I guess that's the only realistic way we've got to do it. But it was very interesting to see, after this interim report come out, a unilateral decision, albeit bipartisan, that was like not exactly using a sledgehammer to crack a walnut, but it was certainly a very clumsy, ham-fisted way of going about trying to achieve a desired result, which quite frankly, I don't think will work anyway. But
yeah, through you, Gary. Am I okay? Yeah, Gary, I'm quite worried that with all of this, we need to have a bottom-up review. We at local governance level are vitally important in the whole infrastructure of running our society. What we have at the moment is a top-down, we all know that, and it all comes down, as Andrew just said. Look at this last bit of legislation in the housing. It just came from the top with no consulting, no thought, whatever. It's got to come from the bottom up. The other thing I'm worried about is this a motion where we see all the centralisation of our services and then the amalgamation of our local bodies and finding ourselves depowered to a situation where, as local communities of interest, we have little say in our own infrastructure. And that worries me quite a lot, because I think that all of our little societies are quite disparate in the way that we operate, how we need to operate, how we need to communicate with our local ratepayers and residents. I think that's vitally important that we keep that as a part of our identity, be able to identify what we need as a community and pass that up and be able to get that infrastructure put in place.
Yeah, so absolutely agree on that, Lou. Just 2 points. One is in relation to that building trust and confidence. There's that strong suggestion from the panel that Local government impact statements are jointly prepared between central and local government when new legislation or functions are passed down. And that would have been a great circuit breaker for that most recent announcement around having local government New Zealand at the table and actually identifying the impacts of that legislation on communities, and at least give us some forewarning that it was coming. In relation to making sure our community voices are heard, that's quintessentially the stuff of which the work I've been doing with Becca relates, so that how do we get these community plans that we're developing where we're looking at the community outcomes, health, economic, cultural, social wellbeing, all of those sorts of things, and get those stitched into a national planning framework so that when central government is looking at allocating out its money or its resources, it's got these community outcomes, right in front of it, so that it can make those decisions in a rational manner and have those funds and resources distributed most fairly and equitably. So that's what that piece of work we're doing with Becca is all about.
Gary, I just wanted to say a couple of things. I just wanted to just support what Lou had said. And Hazel, you mentioned this a lot in a lot of your conversations about just working from the bottom up, making sure that we pick up, those in our communities who want to have a greater voice. There's a great sort of thing out there at the moment. It's greater voice, more choice, and more control. And that's what our communities do want. And we're starting to see that. And I think just want to support what Lou just said there, because I think it's really, really apparent to me that with all this compliance that gets handed down to us all the time, we're expected to manage and try and work with our communities. That this review, this reform is actually going to hopefully really change some things. We want to be better at governance. We want to be doing better for our communities, but we're so restricted. So I have a great deal of confidence, Gary, Kirsty, and you both, and of course the exec team, and providing the path forward and putting together, I guess, a lot of our thoughts. And I'm really confident we're going to see some really good things come out of this reform. I really am. In fact, it's the most interesting thing I think that's out there at the moment that will really change our communities for the better.
Yeah, and Liz, I think you're quite right there, because I take a tremendous amount of pride in watching our kihi residents and ratepayers group grow. And to the point where as soon as we're finished here, I've got to fill in my bit on a newsletter that's now going out to all the residents. So that instead of just getting the usual 30 or 40 responses from the community over something that the council's doing, we're aiming to get 90% of the residents who live here in Kihikihi having a say. And we no longer listen to sentences like, oh, we didn't know that was happening, or we didn't know this and we didn't know that. And it can be done. It can be done. And I just think it's actually quite simple. You just got to do it.
So there's a major shift going on here, isn't there? There's an assumption, I think, that a lot more of the services we deliver will be delivered at scale. And somehow we need to give more community voice. I mean, essentially now we are asset managers of a very big business with, I think, Ken, it's probably something like $1.7 billion worth of assets. So if you consider what happens once you transfer the waters component of the business out, asset management tends to abate away, and we then need to start refocusing on what we do. So it's something of a shame that this review is happening at the end of the waters reforms and RMA reforms. It would have been far better for this review to have taken place ahead of those two reforms. So to some extent we're chasing our tail, and we're making some assumptions around what happens in that asset management space.
Lots to think about.
Alrighty, so no more comments. I think it sounds like we've sort of come to a natural end of the presentation.
One final comment, I guess, Gary, from me is in terms of the resource management, enabling housing supply and other matters amendment bill, that's what they're calling it. Yeah, I've spoken to the team. Clearly, as indicated, it's something that's really come out of left field. We weren't aware of it, and it's a piece of legislation they want to get through before the end of the year in Parliament. So it's under fast track process. We will come back and workshop that with the councillors, so you're very clear about the implications. They are significant on our communities in terms of the information we sent out to you last week. So we'll set up a workshop on that, and we'll obviously be putting in a submission, I would have thought, on that bill to the select committee. So just wanted to cover that point off. I won't go into the detail of it now because you know, it's quite significant, and I'm sure it'll require a separate discussion.
Just to add to that, Wayne, we are looking at how we can collaborate with our partner councils within the future-proof partnership too, in terms of you know, giving consideration to the impacts on particularly the smaller local authorities. So absolutely, we will be connecting with you on that, but also working with our neighbouring councils.
All right. Well, thanks, folks.